Wind howls as 300 armed men surround her isolated cabin at dawn. Mariana freezes, blocking the door. They've come for him. And for me, she whispers, her heart pounding. Her life hangs by a thread for sheltering the colossal, wounded stranger, a detail they somehow know. What unfolds next shatters everything she ever believed about the wild frontier. Mariana had known the harsh embrace of solitude long before that fateful afternoon. Her small cabin, a defiant speck against the vast, whispering plains, stood as a testament to her tenacity. The relentless wind, a constant companion, sang ballads of loneliness through the chinks in the logs, and the boundless horizon, though beautiful, often pressed down with the weight of its emptiness. Every day was a quiet battle for survival, chopping wood that surrendered with a satisfying crack, coaxing a meager yield from the stubborn soil, mending fences against the encroaching wild. Yet, in this stark existence, Mariana had found a fierce independence, a quiet rhythm that sustained her spirit. Her hands, though calloused, moved with a grace born of purpose. Her eyes, though often weary, held a wisdom gleaned from endless horizons and quiet contemplation. She cherished the scent of pine and wood smoke that clung to her home, the only true warmth against the biting prairie chill. It was amidst this familiar, hard-won peace that a shadow fell, massive and unexpected. A cold, gray afternoon wind carried an unusual silence, a premonition that settled deep in her bones. As she stepped onto her porch, her gaze fell upon a sight that stole her breath, a colossal body, stretched across the trampled dust before her stoop. It was a man, but unlike any she had ever encountered, his frame so vast it seemed to dominate the very landscape. He was clad in rough animal hides, weathered and matted, and his exposed skin was a tapestry of ancient scars, each mark hinting at battles fought and survived in a world far removed from her gentle plains. He lay utterly still, save for the shallow, ragged breaths that rattled in his enormous chest, his face flushed with a dangerous fever. A primal fear, sharp and cold, pierced Mariana's composure. Tales of wild beasts and lawless men, whispered around flickering campfires on rare journeys to town, surged to the forefront of her mind. This man, in his overwhelming scale, felt less like a human and more like a force of nature, untamed and unpredictable. Her first instinct was to retreat, to bar the heavy door and trust in the meager protection of her cabin walls. But then, as her gaze softened, she saw past the formidable exterior, past the scars and the fur, to the raw, undeniable vulnerability etched upon his fevered face. It was the face of suffering, utterly exposed, a silent plea that bypassed her fear and spoke directly to the profound well of compassion that lived within her. In that moment, Mariana made a choice that would echo through the rugged mountains and across the vast plains. Her trembling hands, usually so adept with needle and hoe, reached out, not to push him away, but to touch his burning skin. The effort was immense, her small frame struggling against his overwhelming weight, each strained breath a testament to her resolve. Slowly, painstakingly, with a determination born of desperate kindness, she dragged the silent giant across her threshold, into the sanctuary of her home, a place he would have otherwise been destined to destroy. She did not know who he was, or what dangers followed him, only that a life hung by a thread, and she, a solitary woman of the plains, would not let it snap within her sight. The setting sun cast long, skeletal shadows across the floor, painting her cabin in hues of deepening dread and an unknown promise. As the last sliver of light vanished, plunging the world into an inky blackness, Mariana knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the core, that her quiet life, her carefully constructed peace, had just shattered. The vast, empty plains now felt like a stage, and she, an unwitting player, had just welcomed a dangerous, magnificent stranger into a drama whose opening act was fraught with peril, and whose curtain would rise again with a terrifying reveal. The heavy thud as his enormous frame settled on her rough-hewn floor echoed through Mariana's small cabin, a sound both of finality and of terrifying new beginnings. A wave of exhaustion, mingled with a resurgence of icy fear, washed over her. She stood breathless, hands trembling, watching the colossal figure that now occupied a disproportionate space in her sanctuary. The lamplight, usually a comforting glow, seemed to shrink from his presence, casting him in deeper, more menacing shadows. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to abandon the impossible burden she had just undertaken. This was not merely a man. He was a silent, wounded titan, and his vulnerability felt more perilous than any open aggression. The scent of damp earth, pine needles, and something ancient and wild clung to him, filling her usually clean air with an unsettling primeval musk. But as the chill of fear threatened to paralyze her, her gaze again fell upon his face, now softened by the flickering light, still contorted in a silent battle against the encroaching fever. There was no malevolence there, only a profound, almost childlike suffering. The sheer helplessness of such a powerful being stirred something deep within her, a fierce protective spark that dared to defy her own terror. To leave him to die, after bringing him this far, felt anathema to the solitary code of survival she had forged on these plains. She knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that she could not turn away. This was her new path, sprung from the dust of her porch, and she would walk it, whatever the cost. The hours that followed became a timeless blur of quiet, desperate action. Mariana, her heart still a frantic drum against her ribs, moved with a newfound purpose. She fetched clean water, her most precious commodity, from the bucket by the door, the icy coldness a brief shock against her skin. With cloth softened by countless washes, she began the arduous task of cleaning his wounds. The gashes were deep, angry crimson lines against his tanned skin, speaking of a brutal encounter with beast or man. She worked meticulously, gently, each touch a deliberate act of courage, pushing back the wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm her. The warmth radiating from his fevered skin was intense, a palpable heat that seemed to consume the very air around him. As she tended to him, her fingers brushed against the intricate details of his attire. His buckskin tunic, though worn and patched, was not merely crude protection. It bore signs of expert craftsmanship, stitched with sinew and adorned with small, polished stones and bone fragments, each one humming with a silent, storied history. Around his neck, half hidden beneath his matted beard, she noticed a thick leather thong from which hung a formidable pendant. It was a single, large, grisly claw, perfectly preserved and sharpened, capped with a cap of crudely hammered silver, and engraved with a stark, angular symbol, 3 intersecting lines forming a mountain peak, crowned by a jagged sun. It was unlike any mark she had ever seen, speaking not of simple frontiersmen, but of a deeper, more ancient power, a connection to the very spine of the world. His mumbled words, though mostly incoherent, were punctuated by guttural sounds and what sounded like names whispered in a language she did not understand, a torrent of desperate pleas or commands that hinted at responsibilities far beyond a solitary wanderer. He spoke of the passes, of the ridge, and once with a sharp intake of breath, a word that sounded like brothers, followed by a mournful sigh. With a deep, cleansing breath, Mariana poured a small amount of her precious water into a wooden bowl. Raising his heavy head with a strength she didn't know she possessed, she pressed the cool rim against his lips. He drank greedily at first, a raw animalistic thirst. Then more slowly, his eyes, still clouded by fever, briefly fluttered open, dark pools in a scarred landscape. There was no recognition, no conscious thought. Yet his large hand, calloused and powerful, instinctively reached out not to grasp, but to rest for a moment on her wrist, a silent acknowledgement of the life-giving liquid she offered. It was a fleeting gesture, quickly withdrawn as he lapsed back into fevered sleep, but in that shared moment, a fragile, unspoken connection formed, transcending words and fear, solidifying a bond between 2 souls on the precipice of destiny. The vast darkness of the night slowly began to wane, giving way to the first tentative hints of dawn. Mariana, utterly spent, felt the last vestiges of her strength desert her. Her body ached from the monumental effort, her mind reeling from the intensity of the vigil. She sank into a worn wooden chair by the fire, its embers now barely glowing, casting long, wavering shadows across the giant's prone form. As weariness finally claimed her, pulling her into a shallow, restless sleep, she was acutely aware of the unfamiliar presence in her home. The rhythmic, labored breathing of the mountain man filled the silence, a stark counterpoint to the howling wind outside. She slept, a solitary woman who had just defied the odds to save a life, completely oblivious to the earth-shattering tremor that would greet the first light. The hundreds of hoofbeats already stirring the dust on the horizon, preparing to descend upon her small, isolated world. The quiet calm of her cabin would soon be shattered, its peace irrevocably broken by the very act of kindness she had rendered. Mariana woke with a start, not to the gentle kiss of dawn, but to a profound, unsettling vibration. It was a tremor that resonated not through the earth, but through the very logs of her cabin, a low thrumming that seemed to rise from the ground itself. Her eyes snapped open, instantly alert, her heart leaping into her throat. For a wild, desperate moment, she imagined an earthquake, a sudden shifting of the earth beneath her feet. But the sound was not the rumble of rock. It was something rhythmic, purposeful, and terrifyingly close. It was the synchronized thunder of hundreds of hooves, moving as one, drawing nearer with every beat of her racing heart. She scrambled to the small, grimy window, her fingers fumbling with the latch, her breath caught in her throat. What she saw in the first gray light of morning froze the blood in her veins. Her ranch, usually a stark outline against the empty plains, was no longer empty. It was surrounded, hemmed in on all sides by a silent, formidable army. 300 men, perhaps more, sat astride their powerful steeds, their figures etched against the pre-dawn sky like ancient, bearded statues. These were no uniformed soldiers, no disciplined cavalry from the distant forts. These were men of the wilderness, their faces tanned and creased by sun and wind, their bodies clad in a mixture of worn buckskin, homespun wool, and furs. Rifles glinted from saddles, axes hung from belts, and their gazes, even from a distance, seemed to carry the weight of untold hardships and fierce independence. They had materialized from the very rock and pine of the mountains, a silent, implacable force. Panic, cold and visceral, seized Mariana. The cruel logic of the untamed West screamed its truth in her ears. A band of this size, moving with such terrifying purpose, brought only devastation. Her mind raced, grasping for explanations, each one more horrifying than the last. They had come for the giant, she realized with sickening certainty. They were here to finish the job, to claim what they believed was theirs, or to exact vengeance for some unknown transgression. And she, the solitary woman who had dared to offer shelter, would be next. She had become an unwitting accomplice, a sacrificial lamb on the altar of a conflict she could not even begin to comprehend. A sudden, sharp movement from the giant on the floor made her jump. He stirred, his eyes still heavy-lidded but now holding a flicker of awareness. He grunted, a deep, resonant sound, and slowly, painfully, began to push himself upright. The sight of him, now awake and vulnerable, spurred Mariana into desperate action. She could not, would not, allow them to enter without a fight. Her small home, her hard-won sanctuary, was all she had. With a resolve that banished all thought of escape, she threw open the cabin door and stepped onto the porch. Her frail body, silhouetted against the dark interior, was a stark contrast to the massive, silent circle of men that surrounded her. The wind, now whipping fiercely, tugged at her homespun dress, and her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She stood her ground, arms held slightly out, a defiant barrier between the armed men and the wounded giant within. The silence was deafening, broken only by the snorting of horses and the creak of leather. She stared back at them, her chin held high, ready to face her inevitable fate with whatever dignity she could muster. But before the fear could consume her entirely, before she could utter a single plea or challenge, a deep, resonant sound rumbled from behind her. The giant, his movements still slow and pained, had made his way to the doorway. He leaned heavily against the jamb, his immense frame filling the opening, his dark eyes now fully open, surveying the scene. Then, with a gesture both ancient and commanding, he slowly raised his right hand, palm open, in a silent, solemn greeting to the surrounding throng. In that instant, the very air around them shifted, tangible and profound. The menacing aura that had radiated from the hundreds of men seemed to dissipate like morning mist. What Mariana had perceived as a death threat, a prelude to violence, transformed before her astonished eyes into something entirely different. The truth, hidden beneath layers of fear and misunderstanding, now began to unfurl. These 300, these rugged, hardened figures of the wilderness, were not invaders come to destroy. They were a loyal brotherhood, bound by ties as ancient and enduring as the mountains themselves. And the giant she had saved, the colossal stranger who now stood leaning in her doorway, was not merely a wild outcast. He was the respected leader of their clan, a king without a crown, a revered protector of the highlands, who had vanished during a perilous hunt, leaving his people adrift and desperate for his return. His simple act of raising a hand was not merely a greeting. It was the silent command of a chieftain, and it was answered with an awe and devotion that Mariana could never have imagined. The revelation struck Mariana like a bolt of lightning, shattering her terror and leaving her breathless with a different kind of awe. The hundreds of men, their expressions unreadable moments before, now registered a collective surge of relief, gratitude, and profound respect. In a single fluid motion, a ripple spreading through the entire contingent, they dismounted from their horses. Their boots, heavy with mountain soil, hit the ground in unison, a muted thud that vibrated through the silent plains. Then, with a reverence that defied their rugged appearance, each man reached up, slowly removing his wide-brimmed hat, holding it against his chest as a sign of absolute, unquestioning deference. The air, once thick with menace, now hummed with an unspoken honor, radiating from the 300 men towards the small woman who had, by an act of solitary courage, preserved the life of their leader, the very heart and soul of their mountain world. Her fear had been a mask, and beneath it lay a profound truth. She had not harbored a monster, but a king, and in doing so, had inadvertently called forth his loyal, formidable court. Her isolated cabin, once a symbol of her solitude, was now the epicenter of a reunion, a sacred space where the wilds of the mountain met the quiet strength of the plains, forever altering her destiny. The collective removal of their hats, a gesture of profound respect from such hardened men, was a moment Mariana would carry in her heart forever. It dissolved the last vestiges of her terror, replacing it with a bewildering sense of wonder. These were not the savage outlaws of her imagination, but a brotherhood fiercely loyal to the man she had pulled from the brink. The giant, his strength slowly returning, offered her a silent, knowing look, a flicker of gratitude in his deep eyes that spoke volumes without a single word. He then slowly lowered himself onto the porch steps, watching his men with a quiet dignity, his presence an anchor for their restless energy. The morning unfolded not with the sounds of battle, but with the purposeful hum of activity. The 300 mountain men, a formidable force of nature in their own right, began to move. But their movements were not of destruction, they were of reconstruction, a silent, powerful testament to their debt of honor. Mariana watched, mesmerized, as men with hands calloused from years of wilderness living set about repairing her ranch. Fences, long in need of mending, were expertly fortified, posts driven deep into the stubborn earth with practiced ease. The rhythmic thud of axes echoed through the morning air, not felling trees but splitting logs, creating a towering stack of firewood that would last her through the harshest winter. The worn, leaky roof of her cabin, a constant worry, was inspected, damaged shingles quickly replaced by swift, capable hands. Her cabin, once a symbol of her struggle, was transformed. The weary sigh of the old wood seemed to lift, replaced by the sturdy solidity of renewed craftsmanship. Mariana, though still recovering from the night's ordeal, found herself drawn into their silent industry. She boiled coffee over her crackling fire, its rich aroma mingling with the scent of pine and fresh-cut wood. The men, though imposing, accepted her offerings with simple nods of thanks. Their eyes, once wary, now softened with a quiet reverence. She saw then that their power was not merely physical. It was an ingrained discipline, a shared purpose that forged them into an unbreakable unit. Yet, it was not merely her ranch that was being mended. The mountain man, whose name she still did not know, watched her with an intensity that suggested a deep, unspoken understanding. He saw the way her gaze lingered on the neatly stacked wood, the careful repairs to her porch, the gratitude etched on her face. He saw the resilience in her slight frame, the quiet strength that had driven her to care for a stranger of his formidable size. He observed her movements, her efficient way of tending to her home, her hands, though small, demonstrating a profound competence. He noticed the warmth she brought, a subtle shift in the cabin's atmosphere, not merely from the fire, but from her presence. It began to dawn on him that her value extended far beyond the immediate act of saving his life. She possessed a different kind of strength, one he had perhaps overlooked in his rugged, isolated world. He had long known how to survive, to hunt, to lead men into battle, but he had forgotten the gentle arts of living, of nurturing. Her knowledge of medicinal herbs, for instance, proved invaluable as she brewed a strong tea from dried willow bark, easing his aches and encouraging his fever to break. Her neat stitches, usually employed for mending torn garments, were applied with equal precision to the worn leather of his own buckskin, reinforcing tears he had long ignored. She did not merely survive, she cultivated, she mended, she healed. Her presence began to transform his perception of his own stark existence. The cabin, which had always been merely a shelter, a place to return to after his wanderings, was slowly, subtly beginning to feel like a home. The quiet competence of her domesticity, her ability to bring order and warmth to the desolate, was a revelation. As the day began to draw to a close, casting long shadows once more, a sense of fragile peace settled over the ranch. The mountain men, their work complete, gathered their horses, ready to depart, their mission of loyalty fulfilled. Mariana stood on her porch, her gaze sweeping over the restored fences, the towering woodpile, the sturdy roof. A profound gratitude welled within her. The giant standing beside her now leaned less on the doorframe, his gaze thoughtful. He turned to her, and for the first time, spoke, his voice a deep rumble that resonated with the power of the mountains. He uttered a single profound sentence, a condition and a promise that would bind their fates together in the wild lands. He spoke not of payment in gold or goods, but of a different kind of debt, a shared future, offering a sanctuary not of comfort, but of mutual purpose, a life where her quiet strength would be as vital as his formidable power. He was not offering her an easy life, but a place, a purpose, a new beginning in his isolated world, if she would only accept the stark, demanding terms of the mountains. His words hung in the crisp evening air, a stark choice presented by the man who was both her rescuer and her unwitting captor, inviting her to trade her solitary plains for a life intertwined with the wild, untamed spirit of the mountains. The mountain man's words, a low rumble of command and invitation, hung in the cold evening air, carrying the weight of the wilderness itself. He had offered her not a gentle hand, but a stark choice, to become part of his world, a world of harsh beauty and unforgiving demands, where her quiet strengths would be tested and forged anew. Mariana, gazing at the towering figure beside her, understood the gravity of his proposal. It was not a plea for companionship, but an acknowledgement of a shared destiny, an offer of a sanctuary built on mutual necessity rather than sentimental comfort. She had saved his life. Now, he offered her a place within his formidable protection, asking for her resilience in return. And so, with a quiet nod, she accepted the terms, her heart a tumultuous mix of trepidation and a strange, burgeoning hope. The plains, once her solitary domain, now seemed too vast, too empty. In the face of this unexpected, powerful connection, the 300 mountain men, having completed their work of reverence and repair, departed as silently as they had arrived, leaving Mariana and the still-recovering giant alone once more in the vast silence. Yet the cabin no longer felt empty. His presence, though formidable, had become a grounding force, and her quiet industry transformed their shared space. He, who had lived a life of stark survival, found a gentle order returning to his world. Mariana, with deft hands, turned his rawhide-draped cabin into something softer, warmer. She meticulously cleaned, transforming the dusty corners into inviting spaces. She wove dried grasses into mats for insulation, the scent of wild herbs slowly permeating the air. Her simple cooking, though limited by provisions, brought a welcome change to his rough fare, turning sparse meals into nourishing sustenance. As the days turned into weeks, a fragile rhythm settled between them. She learned to anticipate his needs, and he, in turn, began to rely on her quiet competence. He would watch her, often from the doorway, as she tended to the small tasks of their life, mending his torn clothing with surprisingly delicate stitches, carefully drying foraged berries, or tending to his still-healing wounds. It was during these quiet observations that he began to see her not merely as a temporary guest, but as an indispensable part of his existence. Her presence was a balm, her resilience a steady flame against the relentless cold of the mountains. Then, one biting autumn morning, a crisis struck, not from without, but from within their fragile peace. The mountain man, still weakened by his previous ordeal, fell ill once more, a deep cough racking his colossal frame. His fever returned with a vengeance, his breaths coming in ragged gasps that filled the small cabin with an alarming sound. His wounds, though mostly healed, became inflamed, threatening to turn septic. He, who had faced grizzlies and blizzards with stoic resolve, was suddenly vulnerable, his strength ebbing away with each passing hour. Mariana watched, a terrifying déjà vu washing over her, as the great leader wrestled with an unseen enemy that threatened to claim him. Traditional remedies, the strong mountain teas he knew, seemed to offer little relief. The mountain man, in his delirium, began to speak of the chill that crept into the bone, of old wounds that opened from within. Mariana knew with a certainty that chilled her to the core that this was not a simple fever. It was a deep-seated infection, exacerbated by the lingering weakness from his previous injuries. She had seen it before, in isolated homesteads on the plains, a quiet killer that stole lives when hope ran thin. But Mariana, unlike those who simply surrendered, possessed a quiet, resolute determination. She remembered the stories her grandmother had told of ancient cures, of poultices and tinctures made from specific mountain herbs, knowledge long dismissed in her own generation. With a surge of fierce resolve, Mariana took charge. She dispatched one of the young boys from a distant mountain outpost, a messenger who occasionally checked on his leader, with urgent instructions to gather specific herbs from the high altitudes, wolfsbane for the fever, comfrey for the inflammation, and a rare, potent fungus found only in shaded crevices. While the boy rode, she worked tirelessly, brewing strong, bitter concoctions, carefully cleaning his aggravated wounds, and applying compresses of snowmelt to his burning brow. She held his great hand, speaking to him in a soft, steady voice, anchoring him to the world of the living, even as his mind wandered in fevered dreams. She spent days by his side, barely sleeping, her own strength pushed to its absolute limits, battling for his life with every ounce of her spirit. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, the fever broke. The mountain man awoke, his eyes clear for the first time in days, his breath no longer ragged but deep and even. He looked at Mariana, his gaze filled with a profound gratitude that transcended mere thanks. He saw not just the woman who had saved him, but the healer, the protector, the quiet force that had defied death itself. In the quiet aftermath, as the storm of his illness receded, the cabin filled with a fragile peace. It was in this moment of shared vulnerability, stripped bare of their masks of strength and independence, that they confessed their deepest wounds. He spoke of the crushing solitude he had embraced after the loss of his family to a brutal winter, how his leadership, while respected, had become a heavy cloak of isolation. She, in turn, confessed the abandonment she had faced, cast out from her own community for a perceived transgression she had not committed, leaving her with a profound ache for belonging. They were two outcasts, one a king among men, the other a silent survivor, finding in each other not just sanctuary, but a mirror to their own unspoken grief and a shared understanding of what it meant to truly be alone. In that quiet cabin, beneath the watchful eyes of the mountain, a new bond was forged, not of convenience, but of mutual understanding and shared healing. They were two pariahs, each scarred by life, who had found in the other a kindred spirit. The truth was not an external revelation, but the shattering of their internal walls, revealing the raw, aching humanity beneath. Their partnership, born of a desperate act, had now deepened into something far more profound, a sacred alliance against the vast, indifferent world. As the sun began to set, painting the peaks in fiery hues, the mountain man, still weak but regaining his strength, looked at Mariana with an expression that held both awe and a quiet, fierce possessiveness. His hand reached out, not in command but in a tentative, tender gesture, resting gently on hers. He spoke then, his voice still hoarse but clear, of the life they had now built, of the unspoken understanding that transcended their different worlds. He vowed that no harm would ever touch her again, that his strength, once used for battle and survival, would now be her shield against the harshness of the world. And Mariana, looking into his deep, ancient eyes, knew that she had finally found her home, not in a place, but in the unwavering loyalty of a silent king. Their future, entwined with the wild beauty of the mountains, had just begun, a testament to the unforeseen power of kindness and shared vulnerability. With the mountain man's recovery, a profound quiet settled over the cabin, distinct from the solitude Mariana had known before. It was a peace born of shared vulnerability and renewed purpose. The towering figure, now known to her as Elias, no longer seemed a stranger. His presence, once a source of terror, had become a comforting anchor in her often turbulent world. Mariana, in turn, had shed the cloak of her lone wolf existence, finding in Elias a silent protector and a kindred spirit. Their days now flowed with a gentle rhythm, a delicate dance of companionship forged in the crucible of adversity. They worked side by side, their movements synchronized, each respecting the other's unique strengths. Elias, his formidable hands usually accustomed to wielding an axe or a hunting knife, now found a quiet satisfaction in mending a broken chair, his large fingers surprisingly dexterous with small repairs. Mariana continued to transform the cabin, infusing it with warmth and domesticity. She hung dried herbs from the rafters, their earthy scent mingling with the familiar smell of pine and wood smoke. Her small garden, once a solitary endeavor, was now a shared project, Elias's strength turning the stubborn soil, her knowledge coaxing life from the earth. Evenings were spent by the crackling fire, its warmth casting flickering shadows on their faces. It was in these quiet moments that their bond deepened, built not on grand declarations, but on shared silences and unspoken understandings. Elias would carve intricate figures from wood, his focus intense, while Mariana would mend or spin wool, the soft hum of her work a counterpoint to the wind howling outside. Sometimes, Elias would recount tales of the mountains, his deep voice painting vivid pictures of treacherous passes, fierce wildlife, and the ancient wisdom of his people. Mariana, in turn, shared stories of the plains, of the vast, open skies, and the resilience required to thrive in its endless expanse. They found solace in these exchanges, discovering that their seemingly disparate worlds held common threads of survival, respect for nature, and the quiet dignity of a life lived on one's own terms. The mountain, once a formidable, indifferent entity to Mariana, now began to reveal its secrets through Elias's eyes. He taught her to read the subtle signs of the forest, the rustle of leaves that foretold a shift in weather, the tracks of unseen animals, the hidden springs that offered the purest water. She, in turn, shared her knowledge of the plains, of drought-resistant plants, and the patterns of migrating birds. They were two halves of a whole, each complementing the other, building not just a life but a shared world. One evening, as the first snowflakes of winter began to drift gently past the window, Elias pulled a small, worn leather pouch from beneath his tunic. From it, he carefully extracted a small, smooth river stone, worn to a dark sheen, etched with a familiar symbol. The same angular three-line mountain peak, crowned by a jagged sun that was on his grizzly claw pendant. He explained that it was a family heirloom, passed down through generations of his lineage, a symbol of their ancient connection to the highest peaks, guardians of their people. Mariana, her breath catching in her throat, recognized the symbol immediately. Reaching into a small, carved wooden box she had carried with her from the plains, she produced a delicate silver locket tarnished with age. It had belonged to her grandmother, a family heirloom from a time before the plains. On its surface, faintly etched, was the very same symbol, almost identical in its design. A profound silence descended upon the cabin, filled with the weight of generations. Elias looked at the locket, then at Mariana, a stunned realization dawning in his deep eyes. The symbol, he explained, was a rare and ancient mark, not just of his lineage, but of a particular, almost forgotten clan that had once traversed both mountains and plains, acting as intermediaries, protectors of the ancient paths. They were a people whispered about in legends, thought to have long vanished. Her grandmother, though living on the plains, must have been a descendant of this very same lineage, a direct link to his own ancestry. Their destinies, it became clear, had been intertwined long before they met, woven together by threads of ancient blood, and a shared, almost predestined connection to the land itself. Their meeting, once seen as pure chance, now felt like a reunion, an echo of an ancient prophecy quietly fulfilling itself. The discovery deepened their bond, giving their union a sacred, almost mythical dimension. They were not merely two lonely souls finding solace. They were the coming together of ancient lines, the resurgence of a forgotten heritage. The vastness of the mountains, once isolating, now felt like a grand tapestry, their lives a new, vibrant thread within it. They were a found family in the truest sense, bound by more than just affection, by destiny itself. Yet, as the last of Elias's words hung in the air, a new sound began to filter through the thickening snow. Not the gentle whisper of the wind, but a distant, rhythmic thud. It was faint at first, barely discernible above the crackling fire, but it grew steadily, a deep, resonant pounding that seemed to vibrate through the very ground. Elias's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing, the familiar watchfulness returning to his gaze. Mariana felt a cold dread creep into her stomach. The sound was too purposeful, too deliberate to be a stray animal or a natural event. It was the distinct, unmistakable thud of axes, chopping wood with a furious, relentless pace, drawing ever closer to their isolated sanctuary, a clear and undeniable sign that their hard-won peace was about to be shattered. The outside world, with its relentless demands and forgotten conflicts, was closing in, threatening to reclaim what the mountain had so carefully brought together. The rhythmic thud of axes cutting through the frosty air was a cruel intrusion on their newfound peace. Elias, his face now etched with grim determination, moved with a hunter's instinct, extinguishing the fire's light, plunging the cabin into near darkness. He had spent a lifetime reading the signs of the wild, and this sound was not of gentle harvest, but of aggressive incursion. It spoke of outsiders, of men who did not respect the quiet ways of the mountain. Mariana felt a familiar chill of dread, a premonition that the past she had fled was about to catch up to her, relentless and unforgiving. As the morning light slowly filtered through the cabin window, they watched, hidden in the shadows, as a group of men emerged from the dense forest. These were not the loyal mountain men of Elias's clan. Their faces were harder, their movements more predatory. They were clad in the rough, ill-fitting garments of hired thugs, their eyes scanning the clearing with a calculating avarice. At their head rode a man on a magnificent stallion, his figure sharp and precise, utterly out of place in the wild grandeur of the mountains. He wore tailored clothes and carried himself with an air of entitled arrogance that Mariana recognized with a sickening lurch of her stomach. It was her former fiancé, Silas Thorne, the man from the plains whose possessive cruelty had driven her into the wilderness. He had found her, and his eyes, when they met the cabin, held the cold, unwavering glint of a hunter who had finally cornered his prey. Silas dismounted, his movements precise, his gaze sweeping over Elias's repaired ranch, a sneer twisting his lips as he surveyed the evidence of Mariana's new life. He believed her to be his property, a runaway bride who had disgraced his name and deprived him of a valuable alliance. His men, a motley crew of bounty hunters and hired muscle, began to systematically scout the perimeter, their coarse laughter and aggressive movements shattering the mountain's pristine silence. Elias, standing like a statue behind Mariana, his hand resting reassuringly on her shoulder, radiated a primal fury. This was his sanctuary, his home, and Mariana now was his. Silas, with a calculated theatricality, rode up to the porch, his voice, though not raised, carrying and chilling authority. He declared that Mariana was his by law and by promise, and that she would return to him. He warned Elias that interfering would mean the wrath of his considerable influence and a merciless hunt through the mountains. He spoke of reclaiming what was stolen and punishing the beast who dared to defy him. Elias, his jaw tight, remained silent, his gaze fixed on Silas with an intensity that promised retribution. The confrontation stretched through the morning, a tense standoff between the forces of civilization's greed and the untamed spirit of the mountain. Elias, despite his formidable presence, knew he could not take on Silas's entire contingent alone, not with Mariana to protect. His priority was her safety, not a senseless battle. But Silas Thorne was not acting alone, nor was his motivation solely about reclaiming Mariana. As the day wore on, another figure emerged from the shadows of the trees, a grizzled old trapper known to Elias, a man named Jedediah. Jedediah, a once trusted acquaintance who traded furs and news from the lower valleys, now stood by Silas's side, a smirk playing on his weathered face. He carried a map, carefully rolled and tied, which he unrolled and spread for Silas to examine. It was then that the true depth of Silas's scheme was revealed. He was not just after Mariana, he was after the land itself. The map, ancient and faded, marked a hidden silver vein in the very heart of Elias's ancestral territory. A secret whispered to Silas by Jedediah in exchange for coin and power. Silas intended to claim Mariana, then use his discovery to assert dominion over the mountain, exploiting its resources and displacing Elias's people. The true threat was not merely Mariana's past, but a looming devastation of their home. The revelation struck Mariana like a physical blow. Her past, far from being a simple personal entanglement, was now inextricably linked to the potential destruction of Elias's world. She was the unwitting key to unlocking his home for the greedy clutches of men like Silas. The tension in the cabin was palpable, a suffocating weight of impending doom. Elias's hand tightened on her shoulder, a silent promise of protection, but she saw the worry in his eyes, the impossible choice he faced. As dusk began to settle, bringing with it the biting cold of the mountain night, Mariana made a decision that tore at her very soul. She saw the impossible odds, the ruthless determination of Silas, and the imminent danger to Elias and his people. She could not allow her presence to bring ruin to the man who had given her sanctuary, nor to the found family she had come to cherish. With a whispered promise to Elias, a silent plea for understanding, she stepped forward. She walked out onto the porch, her small figure stark against the cabin's dark interior. Her voice, though trembling, was clear and resolute. She announced that she would go with Silas, that she would return to the plains and honor the broken engagement, but only on one condition, that Silas and his men would leave the mountain, and Elias, in peace, never to return. She was offering herself as a sacrifice, a desperate bid to buy time, to save her protector and the land that had become her home, knowing full well the bitter fate that awaited her. Elias, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and anguish, reached for her. But she was already beyond his grasp, walking towards her terrifying future with a courage born of pure, selfless love. Her sacrifice was not an act of surrender, but an act of fierce, protective defiance, placing herself in mortal danger to save everything she had come to hold dear. Mariana's courageous declaration hung heavy in the crisp mountain air, a silent testament to her unwavering resolve. She had offered herself, a sacrificial lamb, to protect the man who had become her home, and the land that had cradled her. Silas, a cruel smirk twisting his lips, accepted her terms, believing he had won. He saw only her despair, not the fierce hope that fueled her sacrifice. He ordered his men to prepare to leave, their mission of reclamation seemingly complete. Elias, his face a mask of stone, watched Mariana being led away. His heart a raw wound, a silent promise of retribution forming in his deep-set eyes. He would not allow her sacrifice to be in vain, nor her kindness to be repaid with such injustice. As Silas and his men began their descent, leading Mariana along the treacherous mountain path, the wind howled a mournful tune. Elias, broken but not defeated, retreated into the cabin, his mind racing. He knew the mountain. He knew its secrets, its hidden paths, its unforgiving terrain. He would not meet Silas with brute force, but with the cunning of the wild itself. He moved with a speed that belied his recent illness, gathering what he needed: a hunting knife, a coil of rope, and a pouch of dried meat. His gaze fell upon the ancient map Jedediah had used, still lying on the cabin floor, discarded in Silas's arrogance. The silver vein marked on it was deep within a notoriously unstable part of the mountains, a section prone to rock slides and sudden shifts. An idea, daring and perilous, began to form in his mind. He set off into the gathering dusk, a silent shadow against the fading light, moving with the agility of a mountain cat. He chose a path known only to a select few of his people, a precipitous route that would allow him to bypass Silas's slow-moving entourage. He moved with a purpose, his senses acutely attuned to every rustle, every scent, every shift in the wind. The cold bit at him, but his determination was a fire in his veins. Meanwhile, Silas, confident in his victory, had underestimated the mountain's temperament. His men, unused to the steep, winding trails, struggled to keep their footing. The horses, laden with supplies, whinnied nervously, their hooves slipping on loose scree. Mariana, bound but defiant, walked with a quiet dignity, her gaze often sweeping towards the higher peaks, a silent prayer on her lips for Elias. She knew the danger of this path, the precariousness of every step. Elias finally reached his vantage point high above the trail, directly overlooking a narrow pass that Silas's party was forced to navigate. Below him, the men struggled, their torches casting wavering lights against the towering rock faces. Silas, oblivious, rode ahead, his attention fixed on his prize. Elias saw Jedediah, the treacherous trapper, at the rear of the column, urging the men forward, his face contorted in a sneer of triumph. Elias knew that if he was to strike, it must be decisive, and it must be at the source of Silas's greed. With a deep breath, Elias began his work. He sought out the most unstable sections of rock, targeting ancient fissures and precarious overhangs. He used his immense strength and knowledge of the mountain to dislodge strategic boulders, their thunderous descent echoing through the night. Not aiming to harm the innocent, but to create a barrier, a warning. The first tremors sent a ripple of alarm through Silas's party. Rocks tumbled, dust billowed, and a path they had just traversed became impassable. Panic began to spread among Silas's men, their boastful confidence replaced by a primal fear of the mountain's wrath. Silas, enraged, ordered his men to move faster, but the mountain was closing in. Then, with a calculated risk, Elias triggered a larger, more controlled rock slide, precisely targeting the path just behind Jedediah. The trapper, caught in the sudden chaos, was pinned beneath a cascade of rocks, his cries of pain echoing through the pass. The ancient map, the source of Silas's greed, fluttered from his grasp, snatched by the wind and sent tumbling into a deep ravine, forever lost. The very earth had swallowed the evidence of their treachery. The sight of Jedediah's plight and the sudden terrifying power of the rockslide broke Silas's resolve. His men, already rattled, refused to advance. The mountain was clearly against them, a living, breathing entity defending its own. Silas, seeing his route blocked and his men in open revolt, recognized defeat. He had lost his guide, his map, and his ability to command his terrified men. His greed had been met by the untamed power of the wilderness itself. He cast a furious, vengeful look back at the pass, knowing Elias was close but seeing no path forward. With a bitter curse, he turned his horse and led his remaining men back the way they came, abandoning his pursuit, leaving Mariana behind, untouched by his hands, but profoundly affected by the ordeal. Mariana watched them go, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and overwhelming relief. As the last of Silas's men disappeared into the darkness, a single, powerful figure emerged from the dust and shadows. Elias, his face streaked with dirt and exhaustion, strode towards her. He untied her bonds, his touch gentle, his eyes filled with a love and relief that spoke beyond words. He had faced down the forces of greed and power, not with a battle axe, but with the ancient wisdom of his home, protecting her and his mountains without shedding a drop of blood. The confrontation was over, the immediate threat vanquished. Yet, as Elias led Mariana back towards their small cabin, a lingering unease remained. Jedediah, though injured, had not been killed. He had been left behind, his whimpers echoing in the silence. Elias knew the man's cunning and his vengeful spirit. The mountain had defeated him for now, but a snake, though wounded, could always return to bite. The wilderness had protected them, but it also held the promise of future challenges, a reminder that peace, though hard won, was never truly absolute in these wild lands. A year passed in the tranquil embrace of the mountain, a period of healing and profound growth for Mariana and Elias. The scars of the past, though still present, had faded, replaced by the deep, enduring marks of shared experience and unwavering loyalty. The cabin, once a mere dwelling, had fully transformed into a vibrant home, filled with the warmth of a fire that never fully died and the quiet hum of two lives intertwined. Elias, the towering mountain man, no longer bore the solitary burden of his leadership. Mariana, his quiet strength, now stood beside him, a beacon of compassion and resilience. The new spring brought with it a profound sense of renewal. The harsh winter had given way to lush greenery, and the air hummed with the promise of new life. Inside their cabin, that promise was becoming a tangible reality. Mariana, her belly beautifully rounded, moved with a gentle grace, her hands often resting protectively over the life stirring within her. Elias, his formidable hands surprisingly tender, often found himself watching her, a profound awe in his deep eyes. The silence that had once defined his life was now anticipated to be broken by the most precious sound of all, the cry of a child, a symbol of their complete healing and the genesis of a new legacy. The small acts of everyday life now held a sacred significance. Elias no longer hunted merely for survival. He hunted for their growing family, his skills honed by a new purpose. He crafted a sturdy cradle from pine and deerskin, his large hands working with a delicate precision. Mariana, in turn, sewed tiny garments, each stitch imbued with love and hope, the soft fabrics a stark contrast to the rough hides of their mountain life. The mountain, once an unforgiving master, now seemed to embrace them, providing for their every need, a testament to their deep respect and belonging. One crisp autumn afternoon, as the leaves turned to fiery golds and reds, Mariana gave birth to their first child, a healthy baby boy, right there in the cabin. Elias, a man who had faced down grizzlies and ruthless men without a flicker of fear, wept openly as he held his son, a tiny, perfect life that represented the culmination of their arduous journey. The boy, with his mother's clear eyes and his father's dark, abundant hair, was named Kyle, meaning strong warrior in Elias's ancestral tongue, a fitting tribute to the strength he embodied, even in his infancy. In the quiet joy of Kale's arrival, a final, profound revelation came to light. Among Elias's family heirlooms, A hidden compartment within an ancient wooden chest revealed not just faded maps of mountain paths, but a scroll written in an archaic hand. It spoke of a time long past when the keepers of the high passes, Elias's ancestors, had formed a sacred pact with the guardians of the open sky, Mariana's plains ancestors. Their duty was to protect a specific vein of silver, not for its earthly value, but for its spiritual significance to both peoples, a place of power that needed to remain untouched and pure. The hidden silver mine, the very one Jedediah had betrayed, was not meant for exploitation. It was a sacred site, and Mariana's lineage, the guardians, were its designated protectors, a truth long forgotten by time and displacement. Their chance meeting, their shared symbols, their intertwining fates were not mere coincidence. They were the reawakening of an ancient covenant, the reunion of two halves of a lost prophecy. This revelation cemented their place, not just as a family, but as living extensions of an ancient purpose. Mariana, the outcast from the plains, was not merely a wife or a mother. She was a queen of the guardians, chosen by destiny to reunite with the king of the keepers. Kale, their son, was the firstborn of this reunited lineage, a child of both mountain and plain destined to bridge the worlds his parents had brought together. Their story, once a whisper of fear and solitude, now became a powerful legend, spreading slowly among the isolated communities. It was a tale not of conquest or greed, but of an unlikely union forged in hardship, of kindness that summoned an army, and of a man and a woman who, in saving each other, saved a sacred legacy. Their cabin, nestled in the heart of the mountains, became a symbol of hope, a testament to the enduring power of found families. For in the vast, indifferent wilderness, where survival often demanded cruelty, Mariana and Elias had discovered a profound truth: that courage was found not only in the grand acts of defiance, but in the quiet, compassionate gestures that defied despair. They learned that family was not merely of blood, but of the unwavering loyalty and love for which one was willing to fight, to sacrifice, to heal. And they understood, with a certainty that settled deep in their souls, that home was not a fixed place on a map, but a feeling of absolute belonging, a sanctuary built not with logs and stones, but with the unbreakable bonds of shared hearts, where the fierce spirit of the mountain met the boundless resilience of the plains, creating a legacy that would echo through generations. Did you enjoy this journey? Tell us from what corner of the world you're watching this story from. Leave your comment, and to make sure you don't miss the next adventure, subscribe to the channel.